morning we're here with David Truenow. Did I do that pretty good? Truenow.
That's
Truenow. I'll let him say it later. Anyway.
okay.
And go ahead and say your name, why don't you?
David Truenow.
Okay, much better. You're good at that. Have you had some practice?
It takes a little practice.
Yeah, practice. Okay, anyway, this morning we're here with him and he has agreed to tell us about his time in the military service. So, David, thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Thanks for having me, Kirk.
Yeah. Okay. I always like to just get a little bit of an idea of what a person was doing before their military service. Can you just give us a little bit of an overview before you were in the service?
Well, before I was in the service, I was actually a registered nurse. Yeah. I had always had a dream to fly one day, and I went into the military to pursue that.
Okay. Now, you mentioned you were born in St. Cloud. Were you living in St. Cloud before going into the military or somewhere else by then?
I was born in St. Cloud. I grew up in Sauk Rapids, and I was living in Minneapolis and Rochester when I decided to go on to active duty.
When you were recruited, or when you went into the recruiters, I assume it was your step because there wasn't a draft at that time, right? I mean, it was...
Right.
Yeah, so it was your idea or someone, what got you to go in there. Tell me a little bit about the recruitment process and how accurate or fair do you feel it was in your case?
So I think they're accurate in what they say up front when they're recruiting. The tail end of it has a fair share of discrepancies in terms of they'll never let good people go because the retention rate is very small on active duty in the Marine Corps because they have it's a much smaller branch in the military than the others, and they have a limited number of slots in a pyramidal promotion system. So I think the reality that you don't, if it's not a time of active war, the reality of you staying in 20 years are very slim.
Okay, that's an interesting perspective. Okay, so it was the Marines that you had chosen.
Yeah, originally I had started out when I was in college in Air Force ROTC, and I passed the pilot examination. They didn't have any slots for aviation at the time, and they said I had my choice of being a supply officer or being a missile launch officer and sitting in a silo and working in my master's degree, and I said forget it. I'll go elsewhere. And then I went into nursing, and I was finishing my bachelor's in nursing, and the Marine recruiters came on campus one day, and I said, I didn't know you had aircraft in the Marine Corps. And I said, well, how come you're recruiting on campus? Don't you get all your officers from the military? And he says, no, we don't get near enough to fill our needs from the academies. So from that angle on, I pursued the Marine Corps aspect of it, and I found it to be very beneficial because they have the concept everyone's a Marine, so they train everyone from infantry level infantry thinking. Even once you're commissioned, it's 5 months of infantry training before you go into your military specialty. So I don't think there's any place where you get a more rounded training and education and opportunity. So from that aspect, I think the Marine Corps was a real blessing, and the chance to travel and meet so many people. The camaraderie is unmatched anywhere I've ever been, because you can meet somebody 3 years down the road that you were stationed with, and they'll be right next door to you, and you pick up like you just stopped talking to them yesterday. And you still get that same sense of camaraderie, whether you go into a Legion or the War Museum in Perham. You just feel at home, you're with your own people. And there's a specialness and a closeness there that's permanent.
even if you meet someone for the first time and they are or were once a Marine, always a Marine. So, but I mean, even if you never knew them as a Marine, there's a closeness already. There's a
closeness already, and that's not just Marine. It's for anybody that served in the military. Doesn't matter what branch it is. You look at them as one of your own. You know, you're not supposed to talk like that on active duty because the Marines want to create their image. But hey, if you're in the military, you're special.
Yeah. Cool. Now, and this idea of, like, I think you said 5 months of infantry training before you would go on to, you know, an officership or whatever. I would think that would instill. If I were an enlisted person or whatever, and I knew my officer had, you know, had that well-rounded training, I would have a lot more confidence or respect for him than if he had just gone to some officer's school and become an officer right away. Do you see what I'm saying, kind of?
Well, that part comes out of the OCS, you know, the boot camp. I mean, when you're commissioned, it's, you know, 5 months of pretty much infantry training. Up to the company level tactics. And, you know, even if you're not going infantry, you might not have liked it at the time. Looking back on it, you can see their concept, because the whole concept of tactical aviation is to support the man on the ground. And they want to instill that in everybody, so that you think of everyone as a Marine.
Well, and if you're up in the air trying to support them on the ground, when you've been on the ground, you're going to be able to do a lot better job of knowing what they need, perhaps, too.
And you appreciate what they're doing.
And appreciate what they're doing, yes. Okay.
You know, and a couple memories come to mind. You know, like when I was at the basic school in Quantico, Major Conway was our company commander. And then I didn't see him till a few years later when he was on the MAU staff when we were doing a Westpac deployment out of Kaneohe, Hawaii. And it was kind of neat because I could have swore I saw him walk by down the ship a few times. And sure enough, it was him. And then the next time I seen him, he was didn't hear his name again till on TV one day when we went into Iraq. It was Lieutenant General Conway as the expeditionary commander, leading the attack against Saddam Hussein. You know, that just
that would stir a lot. Yeah,
stirs a lot of memories.
And I don't want to put words in your mouth, but so correct me if I'm wrong or whatever, but I mean, or maybe I'm somewhat along the right track, but didn't having him there doing that almost make you feel more like you were there somehow or a part of it or connected to it more or not?
Yeah, it puts you right into it.
Yeah.
You're with them, you're one of them. You know, I had one other nostalgic moment like that was, we had a major that flew CH-53s when I was in Kaneohe, Hawaii, and Major Levitt was his name. And we were visiting my brother-in-law and sister-in-law in Tennessee, and all of a sudden it came on the news. There was Lieutenant Colonel Levitt with M262. He was the squadron commander there now, and they were closing the base in Subic Bay in the Philippines. And that was a nostalgic moment to all of a sudden seeing him, because I hadn't seen him since I had left active duty years before. And here he is, the last deployment out of Hawaii to the Philippines, and I'd spent, you know, many months there in the midst of deployments. And that was kind of a happy moment to see him, but it was a sad moment to see that we were closing the base in the Philippines. We had a good relationship with the people there, and have a lot of fond memories of being there, taking the tour down to Corregidor to see General MacArthur's headquarters and where the submarine took him out, and where the Bataan Death March was. They had a cross there that was a museum. It was a museum with an interesting twist because President Marcos had kind of rearranged the museum so it looked like when he was Lieutenant Marcos in World War II that he had single-handedly driven the Japanese off the island. It was a little bit of
Super spin.
super spin on the history.
Wow. That must have been, I don't know, but that would have been almost hard to take, I would think. Yeah.
You know, and another memory I would share from active duty was when we were at the basic school in Quantico, we had the Marine Corps birthday celebration, and I remember Lieutenant Sommerhoff sitting next to me. He was like a 5'10", 170 pound, red-haired, baby-faced, freckly kid from the Naval Academy. Came down on a Marine Corps option. He graduated #1 in our TBS class of about 168. And you know, I said to him, I said, "What's a guy like with a brain like yours want to go in the infantry for?" And he said, "Well," he says, "because I want to, you know, retool the way infantry thinks. You know, so we don't do hey diddle diddle right up the middle, but we fight smart." The last time I ever saw and spoke to him, the next time I saw his name was on the message board. He was on embassy duty in Beirut when the embassy was blowing up. He was on embassy duty and killed in the terrorist attack. You know, so that was kind of a bittersweet moment to see that. And I think what the bitterness part was, you know, we didn't really deal with the reality of terrorism from Beirut on until we finally took it on head on when we went in and dealt with Saddam Hussein. That whole string of terrorist activities, and I know it's hard to get support today for military operations that are necessary. You know, if the sands of Iwo Jima with Clint Eastwood was correct, you know, it's amazing that it was even difficult for us to get support in the United States to keep going in World War II. When you look at what the consequences were then, you know, and that was a flat out, you know, black and white issue. You could see the reality of what was at stake. And now, you know, evil and opponents of freedom have changed in the sense that it's more of a cancerous activity. It's like cancer, it's hard to get at. So it's harder to get people to understand, you know, terroristic threats and the importance of freedom. You know, so, you know, and even Vietnam's an example of that. I mean, militarily, we beat Vietnam hands down. It was our own leaders and our own people that lost the war for us. You know, so I have the greatest respect for the Vietnam veterans because they might have been forgotten by some ill-conceived minds in time. I believe they will be remembered in eternity for what they did. What they fought for wasn't in vain, regardless of the way they were degraded and humiliated. They did honorable service. And, the bright side I could say about that is those that died over there died beside people that they could respect. And, you know, there are situations where, you know, a death can be better than a life lived in vain. You know, and there was one thought I wanted to share with respect to that from the Battle Hymn of the Republic. As he died to make men holy, let us live to make men free. And, you know, there is no greater cause than earthly speaking, than the cause of freedom. And I do believe the United States is probably the last great hope for freedom in this world, because if we ever lost our rights and being a light to the world of freedom, just like the Statue of Liberty is, the lights will go out for freedom over the entire world. So it's very important in the future that we maintain our freedom and instill that in the next generation, because it's going to go back to the days of despotism and slavery without the light of freedom in our own country. You know, and as I was driving up here this morning, I heard on the radio, you know, the arguments in Congress over, well, we're going to do everything it takes to end this war. You know, and in those words I heard appeasement. You know, they shouldn't be arguing about how we can end this war, but how we can win this war. As a way to put freedom as an anchor where it's very needed in the Middle East.
Now when I mean obviously you have a very well developed thought system and stuff surrounding this now as you've been explaining. Do you feel the basics of that were there and motivated you to go into military service, or has this been something that has developed from having been in military service and then observations since then?
I think the basic understanding was there when I was young. I think it was developed. It was actually curtailed and stunted for a while on active duty because of the limited opportunities to stay on active duty. I think that was disillusioning. It's one of those aspects where it's not the enemy that gets you down, but it's your own people. You know, and I think it's fair to say for our freedom, for our military people, our greatest enemy is our own people. Because if they don't support us, nobody else will. So the onus is really put on the individual, because, you know, you're even taught that in the military. You get into harm's way. You can't rely on help from behind the lines. That anything can happen there in a bureaucracy. Anything can happen in our government, because we deal with elected people who are more concerned about their election than your life. So you realize that whether you make it or not is going to be largely on yourself, because nobody else is going to be there.
How much, and this is conjecture I'm asking for, and I recognize that, how much differently do you think that this body of thought, I'll just refer to it as you've been, you know, how much differently do you think that you might think, so to speak, had you not gone into the military?
If I hadn't gone into the military, I don't think I'd have near as much understanding and appreciation of it. You know, and I think anybody that's never been in the military is missing out on a lot. I don't think their lives are complete without it.
In what ways? Flesh that out for us, if you would.
They're not going to get the picture of appreciating that what we live in, you know, that freedom isn't free. There was I don't know if it's a true story or not, but it's a good story. There was a teacher in Tennessee who one day, the kids came into class the first day. There was no chairs in the classroom. And I said, what's going on here? You know, and they didn't get any chairs till the end of the day. And, you know, the point the teacher made was, you know, those chairs were given to you. They're not automatics. And she said the same thing is true of your freedom. that freedom has to be maintained and provided for you, or you're not going to have it. And by the end of the day, the place was filled with reporters. You go in and you go into the service and you go to other parts of the world and see what it's like. You get a different perspective. When I was in Singapore, over there, if you get caught with over so many ounces of drugs on you, it's automatic death sentence. It doesn't matter whether somebody slipped it in your pocket or not. You're finished. And you know, men, it's a guillotine, and women, they're nicer to them. They hang them. You know, that's you know. So you go over there and you see a different world. When I was in Hong Kong, we took a tour into China. Went across on an airfoil boat through the Portuguese gambling country of Mackay and into China. Went to see where Mao Zedong was born. A tour of that. And at the end of the day, when we came back to Macau to depart China, the tour guide, he said, "You like China?" And we said, "Yeah, we like China." And he said, "Well, you stay then." And we said, "No, we don't want to stay." And he said, "Well, then you go to jail." You know, that was his joke, but standing on the side of the line, it was a very uncomfortable joke for us to perceive. And, you know, they told us not to give any candy to the kids when we were in China. Of course, we did just the opposite. We had our pockets stuffed with candy, and, you know, there's no place you can go where there's not people in China. So we slipped them candy at every opportunity. Yeah, and there was one situation over there where somebody had just drowned a dog in a pail of water, and they were skinning it, you know, to make a meal. And you know, one of the guys started filming that, and this 7-foot Chinese guard in a blue uniform walked over and motioned us, no pictures of that stuff. Yeah, so you see how other people live, and the people that are in those, they don't want them to know how we live in America.
Is that why it was the Chinese people that instructed you not to give the candy, and is that presumably why? Because they didn't want. Well, first of all, it was the Chinese people that said no candy to.
Yeah, I think it was a tour guide.
The tour guide, okay. Yeah. And presumably then that was so that the kids wouldn't like you and or know how much better you had it. Do you think? Yes.
'Cause they probably didn't know what candy was. Yeah. A lot of those kids probably never had a candy bar around there.
Sure, and don't know what they're missing until they.
And they don't want them instilled with the idea there could be a better life somewhere else. You know, so we are the benchmark that everybody likes.
What other ways do you feel that a person that's never been in the, I mean, and if you can't put your finger on certain ones, that's fine, but any other ways that you feel a person that's never been, what a person that's never been in the military is missing out on?
They're never going to appreciate the camaraderie, that closeness that's fostered. That you're never gonna forget those people. When I was at platoon leaders class the summer of 1980, the junior drill instructor was a 3-time boxing champion in the service. I think 145 pounds. I don't remember what the weight's called. And you know, when he was a kid in Panama, he used to see the Marines march by, and he just looked so sharp and squared away. He wanted to be one. And you know, he was the most talented young DI that we had there. And then our senior DI, you know, I'll never forget him. Farm boy from North Carolina. He served 3 tours in Vietnam. He wanted to go back for a 4th, and they wouldn't let him. They said, "You're too valuable. You're staying home." You know, what his specialty was, he liked to set up ambushes at night. Go out by himself. He would just tell everybody, "I'll be in this grid square. You come in here tonight, and you're dead." You know, because he's not telling anybody where he's going, because you didn't know who was friendly and who was foe. And then our platoon commander, Captain Wilson, I mean, he was officer during Vietnam, and he was still fuming that he never got to go over there with the platoon. He never made it to Vietnam. He was always stateside. So he was still smoking over that after all those years. You know, you don't forget people like that. They leave a lasting impression on you. They're, you know, what they do is important to them. You know, and I think, you know, you look at Minnesota, you know, it's not a very appreciative state of freedom or the military in general. That's not so true in the rural areas. There's a different mentality out there. You know, but when I went in active duty, you know, there was a clause in the lease that said, if you go into the military service, you get your deposit back automatically, even if you haven't fulfilled the length of the lease. Well, so I came in to get my deposit, and he laughed at me and said, you're an idiot for going in the military. He said, and of course you don't get your deposit back because you're not being drafted, you're volunteering. So that was something I didn't forget. And then when I got back here after being in the service, I remember what it was like going around interviewing for jobs and personnel guys saying, well, we'll give you a call if we decide to invade the beach someday. And I guess my other memory was most states got tax, military people got tax breaks, you know, because they respected them being in the service. You know, while Minnesota, everything that was saved up for our first child went to taxes. And after that, we changed our residency as fast as possible. So it's a beautiful state. I'm not very happy with its politics and its lack of respect for the military and for the freedom that we have in this country.
To think that someone gave their life to protect the freedom of the man that's telling you you're a fool to go into the military and no, you're not getting your deposit back because you're volunteering.
So in a lot of respects, I think that's always going to be an uphill battle because of human nature. And that's part of the reason that camaraderie is so important, because it's our own that keep us going in the face of the adversity that they face at home. Yeah, and that's the other reason I think that being part of the military is so important, because it's more likely to foster that respect for country that they wouldn't have. So not everyone's going to acquire it. Hopefully it'll make a difference on a few more.
And when I think about the job hunting situation and that comment made, it's like, who would fail to recognize all of the value of the training and experiences and integrity that's been built into you as a Marine, as a person to have working for you? You know? That's really just, I mean, that's staggering that someone would say something like that.
You know, and just a take on what you just said, there was one friend of our family when I got out of the service made the comment, well, you didn't have a real job when you were in the service, so you really don't have any experience. So you don't have any, you're no value to the civilian community because you're just a military person. That was, you know, kind words to receive when you come home. Yeah, I've lived through a lot of...
Will human ignorance see no end? I just... Yeah.
So...
Take me through enlisting, if you would. Well, first, boot camp. Was it a positive, negative experience? Both, probably, for you. What's your take on that?
It was the hardest summer of my life. Because all of a sudden you got the responsibility for everything on yourself. You know, who's used to getting up at 4 a.m., going out and doing the Marine Corps Daily 7 on the wet grass in Quantico, Virginia in June. And I'll never forget that first morning, 4 a.m. comes around, the lights go on, you hear the barrel rolling down, the squad band, get out of the rack! And you're like about ready to go clobber the guy.
The barrel rolling down?
Yeah, through the garbage can, threw it right down the aisle. You don't forget that. And that's the idea. I think what was the neatest thing about that summer at platoon leader class that was helpful for me was my brother was an enlisted Marine at the time stationed in Quantico. And wouldn't you know it, his barracks is right across the street from me. So when we had liberty, I'd go up to DC and go through the Smithsonian stuff with him on Saturdays, or he could help me sew a button on my utilities. Every once in a while he'd walk by in the afternoon and I'd be talking to him from upstairs down through the screen window, and all of a sudden the DI is over there talking to my little brother. Yeah, and, you know, I guess the things I remember from that were, man, you get up at 2 a.m. to do fire watch, you're up from 2 to 4, and then 4 a.m. reveille, so virtually no sleep at all that day when you had very little to start with. And I remember running the 3 miles that morning PT, and I was so tired I thought my heart was going to just explode right out of my chest. And then you look back on my notes in the classroom from that day and you could see where I was taking notes, and all of a sudden it would drip off into a straight line like an EKG of someone that just died, and that's where I nodded off because I couldn't write anymore. And you look at those and you think, you know, how was I able to study and remember anything under those circumstances? And you did. You know, there were a lot of humorous moments there that you don't forget. At boot camp, we had this one guy that could not see without his glasses on. One morning, we all snuck out of the shower into the squad band. He was the only one left in there. He was supposed to be a squad leader that week. And we had somebody shout, "Fall out!" And you thought, "Uh-oh, I'm still in the shower and they're falling out for formation." And he went running out of the shower, tripped over the edge about that high, and slid in his birthday suit right across into the middle of the squad band, and we were just all out there laughing our head off.
I'm surprised someone would be accepted into the Marines that would have that kind of vision.
Infantry, artillery, you know, he didn't have, you know, I don't know exactly what his vision was.
Yeah,
I'm
right.
sure it was
Yeah.
within limits, but
Yeah.
without his glasses it was bad enough.
Still, yeah, wow.
You could have a little fun at the same time.
Uh-huh. Now, what was fire watch?
Well, kind of like guard duty. You had to patrol the barracks and clean out the garbage barrels and stuff like that.
Just what you want to be doing at 2 a.m.
Just what you want to be doing at 2 a.m. And a lot of us got to the point we'd sleep with our rack already made, sleep on top of it. Some of us would get another blanket somewhere. That way it was easier when we got up in the morning. You could just smooth out the rack a little bit and stuff the blanket in the locker. And you know, you weren't supposed to do anything after tap, so you'd be studying with a flashlight under the blanket. And, yeah, that world, I mean, I was exhausted after the summer. And, you know, that's all I wanted to do was sleep for the longest time. You know, so that, you don't forget the people you met there. You may not ever see them again.
Now, one can't help but realize what, I don't know of any other word, but, you know, mettle and perseverance that, you know, gets, you know, instilled into you in situations like that where you just keep going on even though it's, you know. Do you see that still in your daily life today? Do you see I don't mean to that extent, but I mean, like, are there circumstances that come along where you feel you can, you know, persevere on through or something because of having had those experiences?
I think it makes a big difference because you pretty much grilled with, regardless of circumstances, you keep going. And you know, there's lots of times in your life where there's no light at the end of the tunnel and there's no hope, and the only thing you can do is keep going. And I mean, the physical training is instilled into you so well that it becomes a part of you the rest of your life. I mean, I was working out at 6 this morning. They have a summer session called Body Blast Boot Camp. Well, you know, I got turned on when they said boot camp. Well, hadn't been to that for years, and the instructor didn't even exist when I went through my first boot camp. So, no, but you know, so I work out once or twice a day, just about every day of the week, and that's just going to be there. And the adapt, improvise, and overcome is there. Yeah, so, yeah, I mean, if I was in the business world, I would love to have competitors who didn't have people with that kind of training, because I'd rather compete against somebody like that than one of my own.
So I guess, yeah, it's kind of like I was referring to, like, in those situations that life all too plentifully gives us, where there's no light at the end of the tunnel and situation, you feel that having the background you do helps you in situations like that.
Yeah. Where you would otherwise give up.
Yeah, yeah,
And,
exactly.
and in times like that, you're not gonna, I mean, I do see a distinction between the civilian community and the military, ex-military community, because the civilians aren't gonna understand or care what you're going through. You know, you go to the military, you go, whether it be a VFW or Legion or to the, in your own words, museum, and you know, they'll help you. You know, like General Trainer said, you know, he says, in training, you know, we work on your weaknesses to strengthen them. He says, when it comes to wartime, we know each other's strengths and weaknesses, and we're there to compensate and help out, because we're all in this together. Yeah, and you see that same sort of collegiality if you get around. I think military people are the place to be when life is tough, because win, lose, or draw, they're going to support you. And you know, and I've sensed that, and you know, a couple of, when I volunteered at the War Museum, I'll never forget. You know, some of the people that came in there. There was one fellow from Battle Lake that was in the Iwo Jima invasion. And the guy in front of him took a machine gun round. He took a machine gun round through his inner thigh and his back, and survived. And you know, just listening to them tell their stories brings tears to your eyes. The guy from the bomber crew that was stationed in England, you know, he says, you know, anti-aircraft fire, it was light all night long and noise all night long, and then we went off to fly our missions the next day. You talk to people like that, you'll never forget them. I mean, it's just a blast to have retired Navy SEALs come in there and talk with them. And last week I talked to a retired submarine captain who had commanded two nuclear subs and 2 other subs, and ran a company before he retired. You know, so it's my escape.
Yeah, sure.
And my oasis and reservoir to be able to spend time with those people. You know, it just gave joy to my life when I went over there one time. I don't know how I heard about the museum in Perham, but boy, it gave me something to hang on to while I was here.
Boy, does that make my world to hear you say that.
And it's been a blessing to have that there. You know, because you know, when you go there and you're amongst your own, there's people that care about you. You don't get that. So I don't. The civilian community might snub their nose at you because you were in the military, or they might not even have a concept of what care and concern and camaraderie are all about. They don't find that in the culture itself. It's just me. Who cares about anybody else?
Do you feel that if you were in trouble, that someone that didn't know you but that was also a Marine or had been a Marine would help you more likely because you're a Marine, or vice versa? Would you be more likely to get involved in someone's problem because they had been military or whatever, or?
I would like to think they would be more willing to help me because they're a veteran, and I think I certainly would be more willing to help the veteran. And I guess if there's two people laying on the street, I'd help the veteran first any day.
I was going to ask, I hope when you're volunteering at the museum that you carry around a pocket full of those little blue slips that people can volunteer for interviews for, because some of the people you've talked to, I want to interview. Do you know what I'm referring to?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't have any of those. I usually ask anybody that comes in if they'd like to be interviewed.
I
But
appreciate
I don't
that.
have the blue slips.
Lina, are you listening? No. But let's, if you wouldn't mind asking Lina if it would be okay if you had some of those with you or something, or I don't know how, I don't want to step into the procedure there, but it just occurs to me that some of these people that you were just alluding to, I'm going, oh, I want to interview him, so yeah. From boot camp, where?
Went to Marine Corps Development Education Command for a few months waiting to go to flight school. That was where the athletes were training for. We had the Olympic wrestlers there, and people trying out for Olympics type activities. So kind of worked with that group. And then from there I went to flight school, and whole different world all of a sudden down there. Got as serious as a heart attack. Had a couple friends that were down there a couple weeks ahead of me. Once I started ground school, we came over to their place one night. He was in his room studying. He had nothing to do with us. Because, that's the first thing they tell you. Orientation. Major Fogg was the aviation monitor, and he walks in. He had been with the wingman for the Blue Angels, and he says, if you want to be back to Quantico in a few months, doing advanced infantry training, he said, go into T-28s. If you want to be a hot dog, flying with a scarf around your neck with a taxiing with the canopy open, he said, you better think twice. And then he also pointed out, look around, because, one out of three of you aren't going to be here next year. So, that was all. It was fear. It scared me.
Pretty good motivator.
A pretty good motivator. And the other thing I remember from that was, boy, they were putting us into the training squadrons, and they needed one more person to fly a T-28. And there you had Marine, Navy, and Coast Guard sitting in there, and dead silence. Nobody wanted that T-28 slot. Go with T-34s and live to fly another day. And he started, I says, you big Marines are you a bunch of cowards. He said, we just had this little Coast Guard girl who can't even reach the rudder pills volunteer for a T-28, and you won't do it? That's right, buddy. We got the scoop already. So, and then you live, every briefing was a grilling, 2 hours of getting screamed at in the air, a half hour of getting debriefed, and you go through that day after day for a year, and you think it's never going to end. It does finally end. And you don't care what kind of aircraft you get, because you're just glad you survived the program. I remember, some of the funner moments, like lining up over the sandbars on Pensacola Beach and doing loops, so you come out about 5,000 feet and barrel rolls and all the fun stuff. And from flight school, then in Pensacola, I went to New River and trained in CH-46 transport. And then I got a lucky break. Well, everybody was gone on Christmas leave. Operations officer came in one day and he said, anybody interested in going to Hawaii? come and see the operations officer. So I thought I better go ask my wife first. Shouldn't have even had to. By the time I came back, I was an alternate. But they ended up taking a few extras, so a bunch of my friends and us got to go out to Kaneohe, Hawaii and be part of the 1st Marine Brigade. And a couple things I remember was, well, you usually do the first deployment as a co-pilot. I'll never forget the second deployment because I went out as the pilot. And, you know, we're loaded down with stuff flying out to the helicopter carrier. And I got the Sergeant Major scuba gear on board. I get a fire warning light. Oop. Thought, that's wonderful, we can't make it on single engine weight. And then I get a second fire warning light. And fortunately there was no secondaries, so I just kept flying. I let the XO know that we got 2 engine lights, and since there was no secondaries, we came in and just landed the plane. But you know, what a way to start the deployment. And get down in the ready room, and the XO says, handle your own emergencies. And, and then the CEO comes back laughing later and says, it was just water in the lines. Well,
They didn't do it on purpose, though?
no,
No.
that
Okay,
wasn't
yeah.
on purpose.
Yeah, okay, but
No,
still.
but those are the realities, you not panicking and thinking through what you're doing. You know, that kind of brings me back to flight school, because they found that most pilots and air crew that died in crashes, it was usually because they drowned in the water, not because of the impact. So they had this thing called the helo dunker that kind of fashioned like a helicopter, and they would put blindfolds on you, and they'd dump you down in this cold water, and the thing would tilt 90 degrees or 180 degrees one way to disorient you. And if you were whatever seat you were, like I was assigned the co-pilot seat, and I was supposed to go out the second window on the right. Yeah, you think, well, I'm going to take a big deep breath before when I hit the water. So I got a good breath in my lungs before I go. You hit that January water in Pensacola in Florida, and in January it's cold, and that water just, the air goes right out of you. I knew the guy next to me was going to panic, because he always did early releases, because you had to simulate wait until all the water was in, and then simulate trying to push the door out and kicking it open. And then you reach, they always said, make sure you got one hand attached to something for your orientation. So I reached where the bar was supposed to be behind me, and it wasn't there, because you get vertigo from being blindfolded and you turn. And so then once I found that pole, and it was just a matter of thinking mentally in your head where you are and crawling through the right door. You can't cheat because they got divers down there watching you. And before you did that, they showed a true story about a guy that survived this, and they had this Navy chief just screaming at you to get you all riled up, and then they put you into it. You know, but they wanted to simulate a crisis situation so you could survive it.
Which is good. Wow, that's pretty intense still.
So you think back, and hey, there's nothing to compare with the military days. I can't think of anything that's ever been as exciting or intense. And I remember, well, a few years ago I did a funeral for, he was a 46 pilot in Vietnam. I did his sister's funeral. And I was talking to him about that, because he was with the FBI in Minneapolis. You know, he said, after being in Vietnam and flying, he said, nothing compares. And he said, making an arrest is nothing like it was in the military, you know. So, you know, and he sent me a video of, he did a film tape from when he was in Vietnam, flying off the ship into Vietnam in country and stuff. And, you know, he said, hey, I know what you're talking about. You know, life is a real dull. after you leave the military, there's nothing to compare with it. And I don't think people can understand that.
Well, I was just going to ask you because I've been kind of thinking this through, and I'm going, okay, you were a pilot, and you know, all this. I would almost think that you would feel like you were taken off of some kind of drugs you were on, and I don't. That's a poor analogy, but and has nothing to do with being on drugs, obviously. But I mean, the difference between that life and the lifestyle and what you're doing, I would almost think like the rush and all that kind of stuff. There would almost have been a withdrawal type feeling.
Well, so in a way, it's like being in prison, or living your own personal hell, because nobody understands where you are, because it takes a certain type of person to do that type of stuff. Very few can do it, because it's dangerous, but on the same token, you have to be very disciplined, because you know, it's not inherently dangerous, but it's very unforgiving of mistakes. And you know, people like that get looked on and put down in the civilian community, because the way I put it is because you're taught to be a wussy in the civilian world. There is no respect for manliness or daring or bravery. You know, those are considered not virtues, but detriments to society. So you know, and truthfully, no, I can't say I found anything that anywhere compares to.
I don't see how you could, you know, yeah. Mm-hmm. You'd almost have to switch gears to some kind of either. Well, I think it's not important, you know, but you know, some kind of almost mental or spiritual or values-oriented type to look for depth in your life than that, because you're never going to parallel that.
No, it's hard to parallel that. And, I mean, there was a psychiatrist, Navy psychiatrist, that did a study of military pilots. And he studied them for years, and he did a presentation called Sex and the Naval Aviator. And that was the title of his presentation. You know what he said? He said, if you fly, he said, you're in this position where you need so many macho cubits a day. You know, so if you're not flying that day, you got to get your macho cubits from somewhere.
I like that.
And you know, he said, you know, what you do, he said, is, you know, there's three basic types of personalities in the aviation community. The guys that fly the P3s looking for subs. I mean, you know, a thrill for them is, you know, putting a steak dinner in their broiler while they're flying over the water. And then you get to the, you know, the helicopter community, you know, well, their idea of a good time is a barroom brawl. And then he said you get to the fighter pilots, and well, for them, they get their macho cubits by, you know, the price of the damage in the bar after the fight. And you know, so, you know, yeah, so it's a dangerous life. It's also exciting. It's challenging. You know, and where do you get the challenge after something like that? When we were in the Philippines during the birthday dinner, there was a Navy guy that didn't want to fly A6s anymore, and they wanted him to finish his term. So while we were eating in the mess hall, he came down on a rope from the balcony and flew across the table and splattered the colonel and admiral and all those guys, splattered the food all over him as he slid by on the table. And a couple Marine majors took him out in the hall and worked him over and took his ID card, but he was, by the end of the day, the next day, he was a civilian. He got what he wanted.
Oh my gosh.
You're jogging fond memories as we sit here this morning.
This is awesome. Were you ever, what years roughly were you in?
1980 to 1987.
Okay. So during those years, were there any mission type things that you were involved in? You know,
There was always tension, you know, there was Beirut, which altered things because my friend was in a deployment ahead of me. Instead of sending us over to Beirut, they kept his deployment for an extra 5 months, and we did our regular Westpac tour, and they stayed over there. And you know, he was telling about how, you know, they flying in from ship to Beirut, and he said he was sitting there waiting to pick up some troops and some supplies and stuff. And while they were sitting there hovering on the ground, all of a sudden they started hearing this pinging sound, and all of a sudden they realized there was rounds going through the fuselage. And he said, you know, he said, I've never been so scared and exhilarated in my life at the same time. He said that is an unforgettable, you know, high that you're never going to get. You'll never forget that. And I guess Churchill put it that way after, you know, Churchill said there's nothing so exhilarating as to be shot at and missed. And yeah, so he got his jollies that way. But you know, he said it was interesting how the formation was arranged as the choppers flew in from the ships. You know, the lieutenants and captains were in the front, and then the majors, and then the light colonels. And they said, well, we have to be in the back so we can control the troops in the formation better. Well, they wanted to protect their retirement. So they put the young guys up there, figured let them get picked off first. Different mentality than when you're fighting.
no kidding.
For all the marbles.
No kidding. You mentioned not having the option or that, you know, you couldn't really stay on active duty. I mean, like you would have liked to have or something, or stay in, or I mean, what was that about?
Congress ceiling limits on active duty. It was only about 13% of officers that were able to stay on active duty after their initial tour. You know, and then you figure even of those that get augmented, only 60% of the captains are going to make major, and you got to make at least major to reach a retirement. And majors technically are only supposed to have 18 years active duty, so they have to get a waiver from the commandant to put in 2 more years as a major to retire. So yeah, so the peacetime is where you're going to get picked off by your own people, not the enemy. It's a ruthless cut. And it's an embarrassing thing to not be augmented, even though very few do get augmented in the Marine Corps. You know, the people that didn't get augmented that I've run, you know, in the civilian community, very talented people, doctors, lawyers, dentists, you know, so it's no bearing on your abilities. It's you know, it's bearing on whatever.
Politics.
Yeah, in a sense, the politics of it all. So, you know, my only option would have been to transfer to the Navy. And I could have stayed active duty in the Navy. You know, I was already gone 5 months a year on deployment. You go Navy, they were looking at being gone 9 months. It was, and I'm sure that's even worse today because of the terrible cutback of the active duty military that happened in the 90s, which I think we're living the repercussions of today, because if we would have had the manpower, Iraq would have been a done deal already. So that's what you don't realize that when you get in, because you know the recruiter's going to tell you, we'll never let any quality people leave active duty. We'll take care of them. Well, they don't have the power to take care of them.
Well, we're almost wound down here, but I wanted to ask you a question that I'm pretty sure I know the answer. If you had been able to stay active duty and pursue it, you would have pursued a military career till retirement.
Till retirement, if I could have, I would have stayed active duty for 20 anyway, because I was looking forward to going to the Atlantic side and doing a couple cruises to see Scandinavia and a med cruise and see Europe. Mm-hmm. So I got to see all of the Pacific, you know, from Australia to North Korea to Hong Kong. You know, never forget you know, going to Palau, where the battle of Palau Island chain, where we had the Battle of Peleliu, because we were on the USS Peleliu and we were there to celebrate the anniversary of that battle. No, you don't forget those. And I'll never forget, you know, flying with the colonel out to do a recon for an amphibious assault there around Peleliu and the Palau chain, and land on the hill, and the natives come out like you're some kind of gods, and then they had this, boy, sugar-covered tapioca and banana, the best I ever ate. You know, we had a feast with them.
Cool.
Yeah. So, yeah, I would have loved to have put in 20. You know, it doesn't matter how long you stay in, eventually you gotta leave it.
Yeah.
And that part is not
Yeah.
a fun thought.
David, I want to thank you for this interview.
Kirk,
It's been
I enjoyed it.
fascinating. No, stay seated for a second. And also, and look me in the eye when I say this, thank you for your service to your country.
You're welcome.
That does not get said often enough. And I really mean that.
Appreciate that.